From a failed military prototype rejected by its own inventor's company, to the most talked-about rifle in America, one design has become a symbol far bigger than the gun itself. The villain in 1,000 news broadcasts. The centerpiece of America's most divisive political battles. The best-selling rifle platform in the country. And also the most feared. This is the story of the AR-15, and why a single rifle pattern became the most polarizing object in modern America. Let's go back to the beginning, because the AR-15 didn't start as a villain. It started as a solution to a very specific, very unglamorous problem: weight. In the late 1950s, the U.S. military was carrying the M14, a heavy, full-powered battle rifle firing a hard-hitting 7.62mm round. It was a rifle built for a different war than the one America was walking into. Fire it on full auto, and it kicked so hard most soldiers couldn't keep it on target. It was accurate, sure, reliable, mostly. But it was also a beast to carry, a beast to control, and increasingly the wrong tool for a doctrine that wanted soldiers carrying more ammunition and putting more rounds downrange in short, controllable bursts. The Pentagon didn't just want a lighter rifle. They wanted a completely different philosophy of infantry combat. Less about one perfectly placed shot at range, more about volume of fire at the ranges most firefights actually happened at, which, it turned out, was a lot closer than anyone had planned for. Enter Eugene Stoner, a designer at a small, obscure company called Armalite, which was, at the time, more of an aerospace engineering curiosity than a serious rifle manufacturer. Stoner's background wasn't even traditional gunsmithing. He'd worked in aircraft design, and it shows in the rifle he built. His answer was the AR-15. The AR doesn't stand for assault rifle, despite what a lot of people assume. It stands for Armalite Rifle, simply the 15th design the company had worked on. It was built from aluminum and polymer instead of solid wood and steel, chambered in a smaller, faster .2223 caliber round instead of a full-power battle cartridge. Lighter rifle, lighter ammunition, dramatically less recoil. And because the ammunition was smaller and lighter, a soldier could physically carry more of it. On paper, it was everything the military claimed to want. In practice, Armalite ran into the oldest problem in the industry: a small company with a brilliant design and no way to actually build it at military scale. So in 1959, they sold the design outright to Colt. And Colt did what small, underfunded designers with big ideas almost never get to do for themselves. They got it in front of decision-makers, refined the manufacturing, and eventually convinced the Air Force, then the Army, to adopt a fully automatic military version. The Army designated it the M16. The M16 went to Vietnam, and its debut wasn't triumphant. It was a disaster. Early production quietly cut corners. The barrels weren't chrome-lined as originally specified, which left them vulnerable to corrosion in humid jungle conditions. The ammunition issued to troops used a different powder than the rifle was designed and tested around, one that fouled the action far more aggressively. Soldiers in the field started experiencing jamming failures, and not at convenient moments, in the middle of firefights. Rifles failing men when they needed them most. That's not a footnote in this story. That's a scandal, and it got soldiers killed. Letters home from Marines describing jammed rifles during ambushes eventually made their way to Congress, and a formal investigation followed. It confirmed what troops in the field already knew. Corners had been cut on a weapon system that lives were depending on. The fixes that followed, chrome-lined barrels, corrected ammunition powder, a forward assist added to help clear stuck rounds, eventually turned the M16 into a rifle that earned trust instead of fear from the people carrying it. Once corrected, the design proved itself, and the M16 family became the backbone of American infantry rifles for the next 50 years, still in service in modified forms today. Here's the part most people arguing about this rifle today don't actually understand, and it's arguably the single biggest source of confusion in the entire debate. The AR-15 name didn't disappear once the military version became the M16. Colt kept the AR-15 trademark for a separate semi-automatic civilian version. One trigger pull, one round fired, full stop. No burst fire, no full auto. Mechanically and legally, this is a different weapon category from the military's M16, which is a select-fire rifle restricted under federal law since 1986 to a shrinking, heavily regulated pool of pre-existing units. But the branding stuck to both. The name AR-15 carried over from the military side to the civilian side, and for decades afterward, that shared name has fueled a genuine, persistent public confusion between a civilian semi-automatic rifle and a military machine gun that most Americans will legally never be able to own. Understanding that distinction is close to the whole ballgame in understanding why this debate gets so heated and so talked past on both sides. For its first couple of decades on the civilian market, the AR-15 was a niche product, popular with target shooters, hunters, and collectors who appreciated its modularity, but nowhere close to a household name. Most gun owners in the 70s and 80s still reached for wood-stocked hunting rifles. Then Colt's original patents expired, in the 1970s. That single, quiet legal event changed the entire trajectory of the rifle's future. Once the design entered the public domain, any manufacturer with the tooling could legally build their own version. And they did. Slowly at first, then in a flood. Dozens of companies, then hundreds, all producing AR-15 pattern rifles. All compatible with the same magazines, the same stocks, the same triggers, the same optics mounts, the same aftermarket ecosystem. This is the part that actually explains the rifle's popularity, more than any single feature. It stopped being one company's product and became something closer to an open standard. The same way any computer built to a certain architecture can run the same software. Any AR-15 pattern lower receiver can typically accept parts from a dozen different manufacturers. Swap the barrel length, and you change what you're using it for. Home defense, hunting, long-range target work. Swap the stock, and you fit a completely different-sized shooter. Add or remove accessories without ever needing a trained gunsmith. It became less a single rifle and more a platform, a system other products get built around. In much the same way an entire industry gets built around one popular smartphone's operating system. That openness, more than raw performance, is why it became the best-selling rifle pattern in the country. It was cheap to manufacture at scale, endlessly customizable, and increasingly familiar to a growing generation of shooters who'd grown up watching it in games and films before they ever held one. The rifle's rising popularity collided head-on with politics for the first time in 1994, when Congress passed the federal assault weapons ban. For 10 years, the manufacture of new AR-15 pattern rifles with certain features, like collapsible stocks, pistol grips, and detachable magazines over a certain capacity, was federally prohibited. The ban was messy from the start. It targeted specific cosmetic features rather than the rifle's underlying mechanism, which meant manufacturers could legally redesign rifles to remove a bayonet lug or a threaded barrel and keep selling functionally near-identical guns. Critics on one side argued the ban was mostly symbolic, restricting appearance more than actual lethality. Critics on the other side argued it was a necessary first step that simply hadn't gone far enough. The ban carried a built-in sunset clause, and in 2004, Congress let it expire. What happened next surprised a lot of people on both sides of the debate. AR-15 sales didn't just recover, they exploded. Manufacturers that had spent a decade designing workarounds now had free rein again, and a rifle that had been a somewhat obscure, restricted category suddenly became one of the most heavily marketed firearms in the country. Within a few years, industry groups began rebranding it publicly with a deliberately softer label, the modern sporting rifle, a term crafted to move the conversation away from military associations and toward hunting, competition, and home defense. While the political argument played out on cable news, a quieter, more consequential battle was happening in courtrooms. In 2008, the Supreme Court handed down District of Columbia versus Heller, a landmark ruling that, for the first time, explicitly confirmed the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to own a firearm for personal use, unconnected to service in a militia. It didn't specifically rule on the AR-15, but it reshaped the legal foundation every future gun law would have to stand on, and gun rights advocates leaned on it heavily in the years that followed. Then, in 2022, came New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, which went even further, introducing a new legal standard requiring modern gun laws to have a clear historical analog dating back to the nation's founding. Suddenly, dozens of existing state and local gun regulations, including several AR-15 restrictions, were thrown into legal limbo, forcing courts across the country to relitigate laws that had stood for decades. The result has been a legal environment in constant motion. State-level AR-15 bans in places like Illinois and California have faced repeated court challenges. Some have been temporarily blocked, then reinstated on appeal, then challenged again. As of the mid-2020s, the legal status of the rifle in America isn't a settled question. It's a moving target, quite literally being redefined court case by court case. And that rebranding effort ran directly into the darkest chapter of this rifle's public life. As the AR-15 spread into millions of American homes through the 2000s and 2010s, it also became the recurring weapon in a string of the country's most devastating mass shootings. Sandy Hook, in 2012, San Bernardino, in 2015, Las Vegas, in 2017, the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history, Parkland, in 2018. Each time, in the aftermath, the same rifle pattern kept appearing in headlines, and the same national debate reignited with more intensity than the time before. Gun control advocates pointed to the rifle's high rate of fire, its detachable high-capacity magazines, and its ability to be reloaded in seconds as uniquely dangerous in the hands of someone intent on mass casualties, arguing that no civilian purpose justifies that capability. Gun rights advocates countered that the AR-15 fires exactly the same way as any other semi-automatic rifle or handgun, one trigger pull, one round, and pointed out that its actual caliber and rate of fire are comparable to, and in some cases less powerful than, many traditional hunting rifles that attract essentially no controversy at all. That disagreement isn't a footnote to this story. It is the story. Because somewhere in the 2010s, the AR-15 stopped being just a rifle and became a proxy, a stand-in, for two fundamentally different visions of safety, freedom, and the role of government in American life. Individual states responded in wildly different ways. Some, like California, New York, and Massachusetts, passed strict state-level bans or heavy restrictions on the platform. Others leaned the opposite direction entirely, with some states passing laws explicitly protecting the right to manufacture and sell AR-15s within their borders regardless of federal action. The legal patchwork that resulted meant the exact same rifle could be a felony to possess in one state, and openly sold at a big box store an hour's drive away in the next, which is a strange kind of fame for a piece of aluminum and polymer, designed 60 years ago by an aerospace engineer trying to lighten a soldier's backpack. The rifle's reputation didn't stay confined to news broadcasts and congressional hearings either. It bled into popular culture in a way very few firearms in history ever have. It became a fixture of video games, from Call of Duty to Counter-Strike to Fortnite, almost always cast as the default, everyman rifle a player reaches for first, the baseline against which every other weapon in the game gets measured. It shows up constantly in action films and television, shorthand for both heroism and menace, depending entirely on who's holding it and which side of the camera they're standing on. Law enforcement officers carry it in one scene. A masked antagonist carries the same silhouette in the next. And unlike most iconic firearms throughout history, which are really only recognizable to enthusiasts and collectors, the AR-15 has become one of the very few rifles on Earth that someone who has never touched a gun in their life could still probably identify on sight, just from its distinctive silhouette. That's an extraordinary, almost unique level of public recognition for an inanimate object, and it's part of why the debate around it carries so much emotional weight. Everyone already has an image of it in their head before the conversation even starts. So why is it feared? Not because of one flaw, and not because of one single feature. It's feared because it sits directly at the intersection of three things happening simultaneously. A genuinely revolutionary piece of mid-century engineering, lighter, more controllable, and more adaptable than almost anything that came before it. A completely open, low-cost manufacturing ecosystem born from an expired patent that put more of these rifles into more American hands than almost any firearm in history. And its repeated, tragic presence at the center of some of the worst single days in recent American memory, broadcast, discussed, and relitigated in the aftermath of each one. Take away any one of those three factors, and this is a very different story. A rifle that was revolutionary but stayed a niche military design never becomes a household name. A rifle that became widely available but was never involved in a mass casualty event never becomes a political flashpoint. And a weapon used in tragedy that was rare or hard to obtain never becomes the centerpiece of a national argument about access itself. It's the combination of all three, engineering, availability, and tragedy, layered on top of each other over 60 years, that built the reputation this rifle now carries. Eugene Stoner built the AR-15 to solve a weight problem for soldiers walking into the jungle. He almost certainly never imagined it would end up debated on the floor of Congress, litigated in state legislatures, and reenacted in video games played by children, 60 years after he first sketched it out. But that's the strange afterlife of a truly influential design. Eventually, it stops belonging to its inventor. It stops even belonging to the people who manufacture it, or the people who carry it. It starts belonging to the culture that argues about it, the culture that fears it, defends it, buys it, bans it, and still, 6 decades later, can't stop talking about it. The AR-15 isn't feared because it's the single deadliest weapon ever engineered. It's feared because it's everywhere, because it means something completely different, depending on who you ask, and because on every single side of that argument, everyone agrees on one thing: it matters.